Number 1.
Volunteers board a bus to go on a search at Hawkins Township Hall in Newaygo County on Wednesday, October 9, 2013. Volunteers and officials are searching for Amber Smith, 2-year-old, who went missing yesterday around 1 p.m. when she wandered out of her house. The parents of 2-year-old Amber Rose Smith allowed their minds to entertain dark thoughts while rescuers searched overnight for the girl who wandered off from her northern Newaygo County home and trekked nearly 2 miles in the woods while barely clothed. You got your mind going racing. You don't know whether or not she's going to be alive or dead. You have that stuff going through your mind, said Diana Smith, Amber's mother. Amber's family, police, and a group of 300 people, many concerned strangers, capped a stressful and frantic 20 hours with a happy ending Wednesday, when searchers found the toddler, clad in only a tank top, standing next to a fallen tree along 2-track road. Once at the hospital for evaluation, Amber simply wanted some hot chocolate. The girl was treated for minor scrapes and bruises, but she otherwise appeared fine after walking through a heavily wooded area without shoes and surviving overnight temperatures that dipped to 43 degrees. This is the best day of our lives, Smith said Wednesday, October 9th. I can't ask for more. Amber wandered off from her Barton Township home about 1:30 p.m. Tuesday, October 8th. Her father, Dale Smith, told authorities he was in a separate room from Amber, and when he walked to where she was gone. Smith searched for the girl for about half hour before calling 911. Amber had walked out of the house before, but the family members had found her without incident, relatives told police. Initially, only authorities searched the area near her home at 13 Mile Road and Cottonwood Avenue, using search dogs and helicopters. Volunteers were asked to join the effort at 11 p.m. Tuesday. An Amber Alert was issued late that night. Volunteers on Wednesday continued to comb a mile of dense wooded area near Amber's home, while cars of others eager to help formed long lines near Hawkins Township Hall, where Newaygo County Emergency Services personnel organized volunteer teams. About 200 people from the public assisted, said by Abby Watkins, Emergency Services Director. Not long before Amber was located at 1:40 p.m., Newaygo County Under Sheriff Brian Bart said at a press conference that it was very suspicious search at that point hadn't turned up any trace of the missing toddler. Sheriff's deputy said State Department of Natural Resources Conservation official Mike Wells was the first to find Amber on the edge of 2-track road. Wells was among a group of 7 people riding off-road vehicles. Conservation officer Jeff Jean approached the girl. She was crying but calmed soon after she realized she was safe. Jean wrapped the toddler in a jacket and gave her water before she was loaded into an ORV and taken to the nearest road for waiting ambulance. Words can't describe the feeling. They just can't. Jean said, "This is why we do what we do." Newaygo County Sheriff's Deputy David Israel was among the group and said, It was unbelievable to see the child completely calm. The elated searchers offered high fives to one another. Authorities were surprised. Amber was found safe and without injuries after a long walk and a night alone. It's hard to imagine how a 2.5-year-old can survive that distance through the woods with that kind of temperature, Bart said. Amber apparently traveled east from her home at 13-mile road near Cottonwood Avenue and south at Beach Avenue. She ended up near Cedar Avenue and 12-mile road, about 1/3 southeast from her home. Amber crossed at least one road, Bart said. Watkins said a positive outcome is not common for the given conditions. It's amazing to have the outcome that we did. It's a reality that we're able to actually locate somebody alive, especially after 24 hours and have a be so young, Watkins said. Authorities will conduct a follow-up investigation diving into why Ambers were able to walk off alone this time and in the past.
Number 2.
In 1972, 7-year-old Steven Steiner was kidnapped on his way home from school. For 7 years, he was held captive by a man who routinely abused him. In 1980, the same man kidnapped another child, 5-year-old Timothy White. Stephen, then nearly 15, bravely managed to escape with Timothy to a local police station, from which both boys were returned home. Stephen devoted much of his time upon returning home to telling his story, teaching parents, children, and a whole nation how to protect themselves from what had happened to him. His story is told in the movie I Know My First Name is Steven. In 1989, Stephen was killed in a motorcycle accident, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. Timothy White became a Los Angeles sheriff's deputy and in 2010 died of a pulmonary embolism, also leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. Slater was selected from many competing sculptors to sculpt a life-size full-finger portrait of Steven Steiner and little Timothy White. She produced a sensitive design sketch of Stephen leading Timothy by hand to safety. She named the sculptural design Coming Home, and it was unanimously approved by the committee. The bronze statues were completed. They were installed upon a 4-high polished concrete base at the entrance of beautiful Applegate Park in Merced, California. This memorable reminds families and friends of other missing children that their loved one may return someday. It will also recognize other victims of stranger adoptions and will serve as a permanent reminder of our inherent duty to protect our children. The memorable committee deliberated long and hard about what to say on the block they had created for sculpture's pedestal base. They wanted to truthfully relate what had happened to Stephen in order to hopefully save other children from the same tragic fate. The block's inscription will serve as a wake-up call for all of us to be ever vigilant in protecting our young people from child abduction. For the families of missing children, a new statue unveiled in Merced Applegate Park today now stands as a beacon of hope, a reminder of survival and heroism in the face of child's worst nightmare. The statue tells the story of Steven Steiner, a masked youth who was adopted in 1972, and Timothy White, the 5-year-old boy he rescued from suffering the same fate. Stephen was kidnapped walking home from school in 1972 by Kenneth Purnell and told his parents no longer wanted him. He spent more than 7 years in captivity, routinely abused by Purnell. As Stephen reached puberty, Purnell preference a younger boy drove him to adopt 5-year-old Timothy. At that point, Steiner decided to save White from abuse he had endured, and the two escaped. Stephen returned to Musk to marry and start a family, becoming a champion for the cause of missing children until his untimely death at the age of 24 in 1989. White became a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy. White also died at untimely death earlier this year at the age of 35. I feel divinely guided when I'm inspired by a project, and I really felt a presence on this one, said Hidden Valley Lake sculptor Paula Slater of the statue she was commissioned to create for the Stephen Steiner and the Missing Children's Memorial in Musk. The statue was revealed in Applegate Park Saturday morning for a crowd of hundreds that include friends and family of Steiner and White. Many local residents also attended, who never knew the boys but felt moved by the story as it played out in the media across the country. The bronze statue depicts young Timmy looking up at a teenage Stephen, dwarfed by his tall and lanky frame. Timmy takes his hand to set out on the dark road from the remote home where the children were being held. The rest is by chilling story, made famous by exhaustive media coverage, books, and a film in 1989. I Know My Name is Stephen, based on the book of the same name.
Number 3.
The Beesburg Milk Carton Kid, who was adopted by her school janitor for more than a decade when she was 14, was able to fulfill a rite of passage every woman should. She went to the prom. Tanya Katch, 31 years old, vanished from her parents' home in 1996 and spent a decade imprisoned in the second-floor bedroom of Thomas House, a janitor at her high school, who seduced her when she was experiencing problems at home. While in captivity, Tanya was kept confined to one room, only allowed to shower once a week, forced to spend Christmas locked in the closet, and forced to use a bucket as a toilet. But on Saturday night, with the help of local radio station Star 110.7, the 31-year-old was able to go to the ball. She told WTAE.com, "I got the shoes, jewelry with it, and then I just got the last finishing touches for hair stuff, and then he brought me my corsage today." Her fiancé Carl Macron called the Bubba show on the station and won tickets for the prom on the Gateway Clipper fleet at Station Square. Once the radio host realized who was it, they immediately responded, "I would like her to experience everything that she missed. Just because it's a little later in life doesn't mean that she can still enjoy it," said Macron. "I'm excited to do something I never got to do and be with other people and dance and eat and have a nice time. It's going to be fun," said Tanya. "This is what I want to do, is show people that even after something tragic in your life, you can move on and try and live a normal life." She told ABC that she would think about her prom when she was in captivity and would cry over the fact she never got to go. Tanya was finally rescued when hosts started allowing her some freedom, knowing that she was too afraid and brainwashed to escape. But she eventually confided in someone who worked at the local store, and the police came to rescue her. She later wrote a book about her ordeal called Tanya Nicole Catch Story, Memoir of the Mule Cartoon Kid. She publicizing her book in October 2011. She spoke for the first time about what she had to endure while she was in captivity. I was just so brainwashed. I feel humiliated now. Absolutely. Most of the time, I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, along with a banana and a can of Faygo soda pop. About twice a week, in the dead of night, he led me down into a cellar with cold concrete floors to take a shower. I was fine at first. I thought I was in love and felt my sacrifices were a label of my love for Tom Host. Soon, however, the ordeal began to take its toll. She was forced to change her name into Nikki and dye her hair. Host pleaded guilty to charges the involuntary deviate sexual intercourse with a minor, interfering with the custody of a child, and child endangerment in 2007. He was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison and was denied parole 2012.
Number 4.
It isn't the most recent case, but the encounter of Stephen Kubacki is certainly one of the most intriguing, perhaps even more so, when you realize that the location of Kubacki's strange incident lies within what has been known for well over a century as the Michigan Triangle, a stretch of land and water that has a number of missing people, planes, and even boats to its name. One morning in February 1978, while a student in Michigan area and close to Lake Michigan, he declared he was going skiing near the frozen lake. A day later, when he had yet to return, his family would file an official missing person report. A huge search effort was put in place to track down the missing student. Eventually, Kubacki's skis and poles came to light on the beach of Lake Michigan. Furthermore, footprints assumed to be his headed out towards the lake. Then, right on the water's edge, they stopped. There was no indication as to where he had gone. No breaks in the ice were located anywhere. It appeared he had literally vanished right on the spot. Even stranger still, later in the day of this discovery, after already having performed an intensive search of the area, Kubacki's backpack suddenly appeared near to the skis, and most certainly in an area that had already been subject to a search. That, though, was the last anyone heard or saw of Stephen Kubacki. That was until 15 months later, when the entire plot around his bizarre disappearance took an equally bizarre twist. On the 5th of May 1979, the doorbell on Kubacki family home rang. Stephen's father opened the door, shocked, overjoyed, and overwhelmed to see his son standing before him. He welcomed his long-lost son into house. According to what little he could remember, Kubacki had awoken in a field in Bisfield, around 40 miles away. Furthermore, he was dressed in clothes that were unfamiliar to him. He also had on his person a strange satchel, inside of which were several strange maps that he didn't recognize. Perhaps even stranger, He was over 700 miles away from the place he skis, and the backpack were discovered near Lake Michigan. Following the incident, despite relatively intense media pressure, Kubaki refused to speak of the encounter. He had no memory of it. And furthermore, he didn't have any psychological problems as a result of his experience. Whether this is true or whether Kubaki simply doesn't want to speak of his encounter, only he will truly know. The entire area has a story of strange activity. In 1921, for example, the Roosevelt ship was discovered overturned in the Lake Michigan. All 11 of the crew had seemingly vanished. There were damage to the ship, but no indication as to what had happened. Even stranger, on the 28th of April 1937, Captain George Donner, on board a schooner on Lake Michigan, would seemingly vanish from his cabin with the doors and windows locked from the inside. When concerned, crew broke the door to enter. He was nowhere, and there were no signs of an exit out of the room. In 1950, the Northwest Airlines Flight 2501 also vanished over Lake Michigan. It was presumed crushed, although no wreckage or bodies ever surfaced.
Number 5.
Just a few hours before he disappeared, on August 13, 1902, Dr. William Horatio Bass, a wealthy and influential ophthalmologist in New York City, wrote a hurried letter. It was delivered to his wife, Ida Seaman Bass, who was out of town visiting her mother. My dear wife, I am called out of town to some major operations. I go with Dr. Falk, an old student, to do a mastoid, some cataracts, and other operations. He promises me a bonanza to bet to miss the horse show, but I am glad to get so much money for us all. I am in such a flurry. Don't worry. I will write details later. Yours lovingly, Willie. It was a curious note. Bass was already a wealthy man. So why the excitement about the money? And why all the hustle to leave? More curious still, after sending that letter, the doctor vanished. He didn't come home, and he didn't write to say where he'd gone. When he failed to resurface after several days, Miss Bass began a frantic search, inquiring with family friends across the United States and Europe. Her husband was a prominent Mason, so she enlisted the support of the local Masonic Society, which circulated his picture around the world. Eventually, a letter arrived from Britain reporting that a man fitting the doctor's description was found working as a medical assistant at the Charing Cross Hospital in London after having first been admitted there as a patient. Friends who saw him reported that Bass was haggard, thin, and his eyes were deeply sunken. Bass later said he had even starved at various points in the previous 6 weeks, even though he had left behind a bank account of such size that he could have lived in luxury in London for years. Miss Bass boarded on the next ship for England, but the happy reunion she imagined never materialized. Her husband showed no recollection of his previous life. He didn't even recognize his own wife. I don't know why you bother, madam, he reportedly told her. We are strangers. The doctor was reluctantly persuaded to join Miss Bates at the Savoy Hotel for a period of rest and recovery. There, he dimly recalled being called away from New York to board a ship and perform an operation on someone with a brain abscess. Confused but relieved, Miss Bates planned to stay in London for as much time as necessary for her husband to recover from his ordeal, and for some further memories of his previous life to surface again. Her hopes, however, were dashed when Mr. Bates abruptly walked out of the Savoy 2 days after taking up residence here, disappearing once more into the London crowd. Miss Bates never saw her husband again. Bates was at the height of his career when he disappeared in 1902. In his early 40s, he was handsome, well-off, respected, and often consulted by the other physicians in unusual cases. He had degrees from the Cornell and the College of Physicians and Surgeons, and had been an attending physician at the Bellevue Hospital and the New York Eye Infirmary. He taught ophthalmology for 5 years at the New York Postgraduate Medical School and Hospital. In short, it wasn't the resume of someone you expect to simply vanish. After he walked out of the Savoy Hotel that autumn day, his wife spent years tirelessly searching for him up and down Europe and the east coast of America. She died, reportedly embracing a portrait of her husband. In 1907, when Dr. Bates did finally reappear, it was an unlikely place, Red Fox, North Dakota. In 1910, Dr. G.E. Kelly, a good friend of Dr. Bates from his New York days, happened to be passing through Grand Forks, then a town of 12,000 people. There, under circumstances lost to history, Kelly recognized his old friend, who had set up a small ophthalmology practice for himself in the town at some point, after disappearing 8 years earlier. Eventually, Dr. Kelly persuaded Bates to return with him to New York, despite Bates' completely lack of the memories about his previous life there. The two ophthalmologists went into practice together in the window of the house at 117 West 83rd Street hang to knit. White lettered signs, the one reading Dr. G.E. Kelly, the other Dr. W.H. Bates, wrote the New York Herald shortly after Bates returned to the city. Here, living quietly to his old friend, and gradually building up a practice as he did years ago, Dr. Bates, now 51 years old, starting his career anew. Bates never recovered his memories of his previous life in New York City. Reporters only ever managed to piece together a loose collection of stories, hinting at a ghostly existence wandering around Europe as an itinerant doctor before settling into life on the Great Plains of North Dakota. It was as if he had a chunk of his mind removed, like a slice of the watermelon chopped away and eaten by the invisible monster, wrote one associate. Bates went on to serve as an attending physician at the Harlem Hospital and eventually remarried. To outside observers, his life has resumed at a rite of normalcy, with one major exception. In his chosen field of ophthalmology, where he'd been viewed for years as a luminary, Bates abruptly stepped off the deep end.
Number 6.
On the early afternoon of January 21st, 1987, Gabriele Nagi, a married father of two from Sydney, Australia, would call his wife to let her know that he would be home from work early that day. Then he vanished without a trace for almost a quarter of a century. Most could suspect, whether through foul play, his own hand, or some bizarre or tragic circumstances, that he had died shortly after that phone call. However, in 2010, just before Nagi would have been officially declared dead, a clue would suddenly leap out at the detective in charge of the cold case, Georgia Robinson. A Medicare card in Gabriele Nagi's name was eventually tracked down, leading Robinson to visit the property and its owner. The man in question was confused as to why the police were at his door. However, it didn't take long for Robinson to realize that the man was indeed the missing person from January 1987. And what's more, it would appear that he was truthful when claiming no memory of his life with a wife and two children. However, with patience and using photographs of his family from the police files, Nagi had what he would later describe as flashback moments, where memories began to emerge from the haze. Slowly, a timeline was pieced together. It would appear that, at some point after the phone call, Nagi was attacked, as his first memory is of waking up with some kind of head injury so bad it was bleeding. Following this, his recollection of hazy at best, with the most prominent memories suggesting he had camped in various areas in Queensland, as well as working on farms and fishing boats, and even, on occasion, sleeping on the streets. Slowly, his name had come back to him, allowing him to apply for a Medicare card. He would ultimately be reunited with his family, who continued to work to restore as much of his memory as possible. Whether a physical attack would cause him to lose such vast amounts of memories, or whether, as the family suspects, dissociative is to blame, remains to be seen. The case, though, is certainly one of the most intriguing of recent times. Though he now lives apart from his family, he is in touch with his wife and their now adult children, who believe that he developed dissociative, a memory loss disorder that often causes people to drift away from their families. Such cases of amnesia are rare and do sometimes have happy endings. When Arizona-based marketing director Joan Bozan's husband slipped and fell at his office, he developed retrograde amnesia, forgetting all 46 years of his memory before accident. As she described on her daily beast, she had to win his love anew. I believe, now reflecting on why he fell in love with me, and that the fact I kept loving and supporting him, as I had always done, helped, along with a pure instinct. His heart began to remember what his brain had lost. Most cases last for weeks or months, rather than years, when UCLA honor student Amartya Singh Aryan vanished on his way to campus in 2004. He reappeared 6 weeks later across the border in Tijuana with amnesia. Once a friendly family took him in and brought him to an internet cafe. His memory started to return and he soon returned home. According to Cleveland Clinic, It might not be possible to prevent dissociative fugue, but it helps to begin treatment as soon as a person develops the symptoms. Further, quick intervention following a traumatic event or emotionally distressing experience might have reduced the risk of developing dissociative disorders.
Number 7.
In 2002, 43-year-old Brenda Heist and her husband Lee were going through an amicable divorce. The couple had 2 children, a daughter who was 8 and a 12-year-old son. They lived in Leesboro, a small Lancaster County town in southeastern Pennsylvania. Brenda worked as a bookkeeper at a local car dealership. In an effort to finance her own apartment, Brenda applied for a state housing assistance. The agency denied her request. Depressed, overwhelmed, and distraught, Brenda, after driving her children to school one day in February 2002, drove to a nearby town and parked her car in a bus station lot. From there, she walked to a park when she sat on a bench and cried. Brenda didn't go back to her car and drive home that day. To her family and friends and to local police, she became a missing person. 4 days after Brenda dropped her children off at school, police found her car parked in the bus station lot. When a mother takes her kids to school and doesn't return home, the police assume that she has been abducted. As days went by, without anyone hearing from or seeing Brenda Heist, detectives began to think that she may have had been murdered. At that point, the missing persons case turned into homicide investigation. As in the most missing wife cases, the suspicion in Brenda's disappearance fell on her husband. As psychic detectives and other workshop callers flooded the Heist missing persons investigators with phone leads, homicide investigators focused on Lee Heist as their primary murder suspect. Mr. Heist had to quit his job. He ran into financial difficulties and eventually lost his home. After several years as a suspect in his wife's disappearance and murder, investigators, after a series of polygraph tests, clearly Heist of wrongdoing in the case. His wife remained missing, however, and was presumed dead. In 2008, the Lancaster County Major Crimes Unit began investigating the Brenda Heist disappearance as a cold case murder. 2 years later, Lee Heist petitioned a Lancaster County court to declare his wife legally dead, with Brenda officially declared missing and possibly deceased. Mr. Heist was able to marry another woman. As it turned out, while Lee Heist was put through hell as a suspect in his wife's murder, Brenda was alive in South Florida. On the day of her disappearance, she was approached by 2 men and a woman who saw her crying on the park bench. After relating her tale of woe, they invited her to join them on a hitchhiking trip to Florida. She accepted their offer. Brenda Heist spent her first 2 years in Key Largo, Florida, living under bridges and eating restaurant garbage. She entered a new phase in her life when she moved into a camp trailer with a man she met on the street. For the next 7 years, Brenda lived with the man in Key West. They both worked as a day laborers cleaning boats and doing odd jobs for cash. In 2011, after her relationship with a trailer roommate soured, Brenda was back on the street. She worked odd jobs and hung out on the beach. In December 2012, under her alias Casey Lynn Smith, Brenda got a job as a live-in housekeeper for a family in Tampa Bay. According to her employer, she had good references. A few months after landing the housekeeper's job, a police pulled Brenda over for driving with an expired license plate. The officer found drugs in her car. She served 2 months in Pensacola County Jail on the drug possession offense. Following her release from jail, she spent a few weeks behind bars in Santa Rosa County on an identified theft charge. At one point, she lived in a tent community run by a Florida social service agency. The Florida authorities called Leedisboro Surgeon John Scofield with the news that Brenda Heist was not dead and no longer missing. Her children, now college students, still had a mother. On May 3, 2013, Brenda was sent back to the Santa Rosa County Jail on various theft-related charges. Morgan Heist, her 19-year-old daughter, has told the reporters that she has no interest in reuniting with her mother. On June 11, 2013, a judge in Pensacola, Florida sentenced Heist, known in the Santa Rosa court system as Kelsey Smith, to 1 year in jail in connection to probation violation. She pleaded no contest to failing to check in with authorities after leaving the Pensacola area following her release from jail in April. She'd been on probation for using someone else's identification during a traffic stop.
Number 8.
For 26 years, Richard Hoechlin's wife and kids had no idea what happened to him after he disappeared on February 10, 1993. How do you walk away from your own children? How do you turn your back? Lisa Allen, Hoechlin's wife at that time of his disappearance, told ABC News 2020. Eiler and Hoechlin had an idyllic life in Indianapolis. After an earlier divorce, Hoechlin thought he had found love again with Eiler. He was very spontaneous. He was a shaker and a roller. He was always making deals and doing things. He was very successful. Eiler said. He was a lot of fun to be with. The family had a big house, a steady income, and exotic vacations, but their picture-perfect relationship came to an end one day in 1993, after 11 years of marriage. He called me at work and told me that he was ill, and that he needed to go to an emergency room, Eiler recalled. And I said, "Well, why don't you just wait? I will go with you." He said, "No, I don't have time to wait." Eiler said she called the hospitals in the area, but there was no trace of him ever being there. Hoechlin had vanished. His toothbrush was still there. He didn't pack any clothes. It was cold. It was in February. He didn't take a coat, said Eiler. Hoechlin hadn't even taken his passport, Eiler said. Their son Matthew was 9 years old at that time, and his brother Doug, just 6 years old. Initially, you think, okay, it won't last long, he'll be back, Matthew Hoechlin told 2020. Authorities eventually found Richard Hoechlin's car abandoned in Indianapolis International Airport, but there was no record of Richard Hoechlin taking any flights out of the airport that day he missing. Ayla said, that summer, his two sons both received a birthday card from their father, each containing $50. Doc Scar said, maybe sometime soon we will get to see each other. I bet I won't even know you. It has been so long, my mother, by Dad. Those words were the last they ever heard from Hoechlin. And Ayla said police viewed her as a suspect in his disappearance. They interrogated me over and over. They alluded a lot to the possibility that he was involved in some type of drug trafficking, which I had no clue. Ayla said they lost the house and cars after he vanished. Her mother stepped in to help. He devastated us. He left us with nothing, absolutely nothing. I was very broken, she said. After 10 years, Hoechlin was declared dead. Ayla eventually moved on and remarried. Then, just this past summer, Ayla received a voicemail from Detective Anthony Cardillo of the Pasco County Sheriff's Department in Florida. He asked me if I knew who Richard Hoechlin was, and I said, yes, that's my ex-husband, Ayla said. He said, we have him in custody. It turns out, police said, he had been living as a man named Terry Szymanski, who was a fisherman killed in a boating accident in 1991. After he disappeared in 1993, police said Hoechlin had fled to Florida, where he rented a room from Szymanski's father. Hoechlin found Szymanski's death certificate and stole it, police said. Using that death certificate, he applies for a birth certificate. He uses that birth certificate to get a driver's license. Once he has that driver's license, he starts establishing his name as Terry Szymanski, Cardillo told 2020. According to Cardillo, Hoechlin bought a house in Zephyr Hills, Florida and married a woman named Mary. The two even had a child together. She said there was always questions, but he could always come up with a reason or an explanation, Cardillo said. Hoechlin might have gotten away with living under his new identity. However, this past summer, the real Terry Szymanski's family started looking into their family history using Ancestry.com for a genealogy project. Through this research, the real Szymanski's nephew discovered that his uncle, who supposedly died in 1991, had gotten married 2 years after they buried him. After the Szymanski family contacted police, Cardillo interviewed Hoechlin. He told me his name was Terry Szymanski, provided me with a driver's license. Terry Szymanski, correct date of birth. Everything, Cardillo recalled. I asked him again. He said his name is Terry Szymanski. Eventually, I showed him the death certificate that I'd brought with me. He eventually told me his real name was Richard Hoechlin. Cardillo said Hoechlin's unsuspecting new wife and son were blindsided by the revelation. Obviously, their 20 years of marriage was shattered. Cardillo said the sun came down. He was shocked. It was still his father. It's his blood, but that Szymanski name is not his. The emotions they were feeling were between anger and sadness and the wonder of why. Cardillo said Hoechlin's only explanation for disappearing was family issues with his wife and children. I believe he got caught up with the wrong people. got carried away and over his head in something, Matthew Hoechlin said. Richard Hoechlin is now in jail awaiting trial on charges that include identified fraud. He pleaded not guilty to the charges and was unavailable for an interview with 2020. I have this ring. This is my dad's ring. That's it. I do wear it for the most part every day, but I think I wear it to remind me of a bad example, said Matthew Hoechlin.